Managers of Reddit, what's the worst thing an employee has done to get themselves fired? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. Cart associate at Walmart was playing on his phone while using the cart mule to push a large line of carts. He ran over an elderly woman, breaking her leg and hip, was immediately fired. Not sure what all happened to him legally, but he was out of our store. Answer. Those things don't seem too powerful when you're navigating them, but I pinned myself against the wall with one, and very quickly realizing that a machine that can easily move 20 to 30 carts is still to be respected. It didn't hurt much, but I couldn't move the darn thing either without locking it. Was the older model with the circular emergency button. If you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee. Link is in the description. I'll show the most interesting messages in my videos. Story 2. Had a guy who was a recovering meth head, had all the physical tells, but seemed to have his shoot sorted out in the interview, so I gave him a chance. He was getting clean so he could get joint custody of his kids. About 6 months he was an ideal server, great to customers, never missed an order, anything. Well, court didn't think he did enough, so gave the baby mama the green light to move out of state and take the kids. Dude showed up to work dripping sweat, grinding his jaw, everything. I sent him home and said, "You look like you're catching something bad. Don't come to work this sick again." I gave him the out. I gave him the single chance and the excuse. He came into work tweaking a second time, and I sent him home. I had a final paycheck waiting for him when he showed up for his next shift. He was clean that day, but I couldn't risk the health of the rest of my staff or my customers. Met him at the door, told him that there was pay for all of his shift, as well as for the rest of the week. He didn't argue it. He just nodded, said thanks for the chance, apologized for fudge it up, took the check, and walked away. Never seen him since. Last I heard, he was homeless and on meth. Broke my darn heart. It's always one of the worst terminations I've done, because he knew he fudged up, but he also didn't have the wherewithal to be sober without doing it for his kids. That's the worst, because I knew how great of a dude he was, and I also know how none of it mattered in the end. I fired other people for substances, violence, racism, sexism, harassment, theft. You think of it, and in my 2 decades in management, I've probably fired someone for it. I've let go of more people than I can count, but Jesse always sticks out to me as the worst, because that dude deserves so much better than he let himself have. Story 3. I was a newly hired manager at McDonald's. The guy before me was working the cash register. This store was very highly trafficked. It was right off of the interstate, right on the border of city and middle of nowhere. It was the first place to stop and get some food for travelers coming in, and the last place to stop and get some food for travelers leaving out. It was not uncommon to have over 1,000 in under an hour in the cash register, and policy was to drop money in the safe at least once every hour. So this new guy comes in, works for a few hours, but the manager never did the drops. After about 4 hours, the employee goes to the bathroom and disappears. Turns out he left with over 4,000 from the cash register. Police were called because obviously they have the guy's ID, address, and information on file, only to find out that everything was false. He stole someone's ID and social that looked similar to him and used a fake address. I don't think the police ever found him or figured out who he was. Answer. I used to work loss prevention for Target and had a similar thing happen. We hired a young lady for holiday help. She stole all the cash out of her register, then went a few blocks away to another store, told a cashier she was there to cover her break, stole all the cash from that register, and disappeared. All her documents turned out to be stolen, and we never caught her. Story 4. One employee was constantly stealing food from the refrigerator that other employees placed in there for lunch and late work night dinners. Eventually, after weeks of complaints, the IT department set up a hidden camera and caught the woman taking 2 yogurts, a Weight Watchers TV dinner, and a can of Coke in one swoop. At another job, a coworker got snippy with the receptionist during an internal phone call. As she clicked the phone, she said, "F ucky bitch." But the click did not disconnect the call. The receptionist was still on the line and said, "What did you call me?" HR would later get involved. It was investigated, and the coworker was terminated. Answer. I worked at a shoot discount clothing store once on recommendation of my high school best friend. Rumors started that we had a lunch thief taking half-eaten takeout and stuff. So this supervisor lady starts bursting in on my lunch breaks to question me on what I was eating. I answered honestly, told her it was food I brought. It was weird, but I figured she was doing it to everybody to catch the thief. Couple weeks later, my friend quit. Didn't blame her. That job sucked, but I needed it. Well, my friend and I had a falling out a few months after that. I was telling a coworker about what she did, and she responded, "Well, considering how she got fired, I'm not at all surprised." Record scratch. What? Turns out she was the lunch stealer. She was feeling the heat, so she told management it was me, and I was the only one that got interrogated about my lunch. They eventually figured out it was her and fired her. The gossip train ran its course, but nobody brought it up to me, probably because they figured it would be a touchy subject. It was wild. Story 5. Someone got fired because he went in the bathroom on his break and huffed the bottle of canned air and passed out. He was a good employee too. What a waste. Answer. I'm a security guard and someone did something similar at my work. He hid a bunch of them around the work site and he got caught by one of his supervisors and brought to us. We had to go around and try to find them all. We thought we found them all, and we took our eyes off him for a second to figure out the next steps. In the couple of seconds we took our eyes off him, we heard the distinct sound of pressurized air, and then the guy started screaming his head off. The person who checked the waiting room he was in didn't end up checking the vents, and he had one hidden away in there. Story 6. Guy was just hired. He asked to go home on his second day because he shoot his pants. All right, shoot happens. A little TMI, but what can you do? He must be an honest soul. Went home for the afternoon, came in on the third day, shoot his pants again, and asked to go home. There was no fourth day. Answer. At a job I used to have, we fired a guy who would occasionally shoot his pants. Not for that. He was fired because he kept showing up late, and when he got fired, he stole a customer's car, got high in it, and drove it into the side of a concrete boat launch, nearly hitting an off-duty cop who was fishing off of it. That's how we found out he was a heroin addict, and apparently one of the withdrawal symptoms is diarrhea. Story 7. I'm not a manager, but an employee of an airport cargo handling company. We had a guy, crash a brand new jet engine air start unit into a jet engine. Bosses were not happy. Story 8. Early 20s kid disappeared for a week on a heroin binge. His friends dropped him off in the middle of the day the next week, walking into the office high off his balls as if nothing happened. The next day his dad came to apologize, explain what happened, let us know that he was going back to rehab, and ask if he could continue working afterwards. Answer. I worked with a kid that had a heroin problem. He was 18 years old. He was a very nice kid and started out as a great worker. As his substances habit got worse, so did his attendance and production. He went to rehab, came back sober, and was doing good for the better part of a year. Then we started to see his old habits came back to visit. His mother called us one day and said he was going back to rehab again, but only for enough time to detox and get the ball rolling on counseling and getting placed in an outpatient program. She wanted to make sure he wasn't going to lose his job. He came out of that program and returned to work. I left a few months later. He seemed like he was doing well at that time. This was in 2017-2018. He passed away from a substances overdose 2 weeks ago. Story 9. Literally just shoveled money out of the cash register into his pockets with 3 separate cameras looking at him. He took several $1,000s. Story 10. Left on shift. She was a nurse for what it's worth, so she didn't just leave a store or something. She left her patients unattended and her CNA left with her to go fudge her CNA at the dog park across the street. Came back and finished her shift, night shift. Posted "I love fudge" on Facebook at 3 a.m. during said shift, which her husband, not the CNA, saw, which led to him showing up at the facility threatening staff members. Last I heard about her, she lost her license due to trafficking fentanyl. Story 11. Supposed to drive a car from one city to another on a Friday, probably 2-hour trip, took it to Mexico and partied for a weekend, and delivered the car on Monday. This was not even a border state. Answer. Sounds like the plot to a comedy movie. Dude got carjacked at a gas station by a desperate thief who just held up the gas station at gunpoint, forced to drive to Mexico, befriending the thief along the way. Partied all weekend and met the girl of his dreams and got back to work on time on Monday, thinking it'd all blow over. I'd watch it, but I think I've seen it before. Story 12. I used to run a large food distribution center. The overnight crew was responsible for picking orders for delivery the next day. There was a recovering alcoholic on the night crew who fell off the wagon one night. He snuck out at break and drank a whole 5th of vodka. Once he was back on the clock, he tried to stab another employee for picking the bag of potatoes he wanted for his pallet. A fight ensued and the tipsy guy ran outside. We found him blacked out in his car with the doors locked. I was worried he might choke on his own vomit, so we called an ambulance. They didn't want to wake him or try to treat him where he had a knife, so we had to wait for the police to show up, break a window, and get him out of the car. Then they took him to the hospital to pump his stomach. Story 13. First job in insurance. Weird guy wanted to be an SIU, the team that investigates fraud. He got it in his head that rather than investigating external fraud as part of the claims department, they were a kind of clandestine CIA operation who were listening in on our phone calls, and you could get tapped to join if you were smart enough and hardworking enough. He was fired for sleeping at his desk repeatedly. Story 14. Intimacy. Harassing the 17-year-old daughter of the best friend of the business owner is a pretty special way to get fired. Answer. We had a maintenance guy tell the owner's daughter and hostess something intimacy and inappropriate. Not only was I in earshot of his comments, I was right fudge there. I had never heard anything from him like that, but apparently he had said things before to female employees. But me and a line cook heard it and immediately took him to the office. Like, WTF, bro? Story 15. Just a few weeks ago, salesman tells HQ that his very large national customer wants us to use a specific vendor for a multi-million-dollar contract. We set it up, but have procurement run backgrounds on the vendor to make sure they are reliable, no slave or child labor, etc. After digging down many layers, the founding documents for the vendor come back. It's owned by the salesperson and his sister. It was done quietly to save face with the customer, but the salesperson no longer works here. Story 16. Not a manager, but a carpenter with several employees. But I had a worker doing a window replacement. I'm a person's home. The room he was working in had a fully stocked bar. Employee drank a 400ml bottle of liquor, and homeowner found him passed out in their guest room. Answer. Like, I don't know why, but the stories I always hear from carpenters are one way or the other. And I've talked to about 20-some carpenters in the last 10 years. They either are 1. Divorced, 2. Has a teenage son, 3. Trying to make money to buy his son a hot rod for his 16th. 4. Travels out of state constantly with his girlfriend. 5. Likes to drink a lot. 6. Likes sports gambling. Or 1. Carpenter that owns the business. 2. Happily married. 3. Pillars of the community. 4. Has 2 to 4 kids. 5. Built his house with his own hands. 6. Doesn't drink because he twisted his back a couple years ago and is taking pain meds. Story 17. He had intimacy with a customer in the dressing room, and then he came out and told me he'd been fooling around, and then he just left. He wasn't fired. Later on, he tried to file for unemployment because he said no one told him he wasn't allowed to do it. The only thing that kept us from having to pay his unemployment was the fact that I didn't fire him. He left of his own accord. Story 18. Hired a manager in his mid-40s from a well-known publicly held auto group. He was fired after a week for asking a newly hired 22-year woman if he could sniff coke off her boobs. He also seemed to talk about his intimacy adventures a lot. We think his former employer, KNEW, he was a serial intimacy harasser and was pleased to dump him on us. Story 19. When I was a manager in a smaller kennel, 2 of the female employees came independently to say one of the other workers had shown them some very inappropriate images and made a lot of inappropriate comments about the animals. Also saw some pictures of him with the dogs at work that had some very inappropriate comments alongside them. He didn't work for much longer and lost his shoot when I told him we can't allow him to work around animals or give him a reference. Answer. This makes me so happy to hear because I had a random fudge nasty furry walk up to me and tell me at a college party in '08 he'd been fudge dogs at a kennel he worked at for years and nobody had ever caught him. I was so confused and grossed out I just left and went home and never partied with those people again. I had no idea how to even find out who the dude was to report him. So it's good to know people like that do get caught eventually doing that kind of harm to animals. Story 20. He asked a coworker in the parking lot if he could pay him to complete his assigned work. He faked it through the interview process and was a terrible hire. Answer. Literally 3 to 4 days before graduation, I'd already finished exams, packed my stuff. A fellow student who'd spent all 4 years talking about how she was too smart for university asked me to write a term paper for her. The payment she offered was quite good, even if I weren't ethically opposed to doing it. Like I'm gonna risk getting expelled 3 days before graduation? Get real. Story 21. One of my former chefs got tipsy and probably high on shift, smashed a door, tried to fight the GM, left of his bicycle but fell off it on the driveway, which no one knew. I come to work not knowing there was an issue the night before to the guy's stuff all over the driveway. Tobacco, papers, filters, a grinder, adult beverage bottle smashed, his underwear, and a few other bits. I clean it all up on my way in. He's not there yet, so I start to prep breakfast, and I ask what the fudge has happened the night before when I find the door. He finally comes in late at 7:30, bleeding all over my kitchen from an open wound in his leg, and he's wearing shorts. I fire him for gross misconduct. This isn't even really all the stupid part. The guy, so off his face on whatever substances he's been on, proceeds to forget that I fired him and comes into work the next day. I'm in fudge disbelief when he comes in, and I have to fire him for the second morning in a row. Story 22. Blew up $45,000 worth of equipment through shoddy electrical work he had been already trained for. To be fair, this one's also on us management. We probably shouldn't have let him have a go at even this simple electrical work considering how unreliable he had shown himself to be thus far. Answer. So as an electrician, I have to ask, was this guy licensed? In my state, you don't get to run jobs until you do your 4 years and pass the state test. I see contractors putting guys out on jobs to run them before they're licensed here, and I have zero feels for the contractor eating big losses like this when they have unlicensed workers running things. That's more on management and not the employees. Story 23. I had an employee pull out a bag of meth and ask another employee if he wanted to smoke some of it. Another employee was supposed to go canvassing in a company car. After hours of being gone and not answering phone calls, the police called from a county 3 hours away to inform me that the employee had crashed the car because he was high on heroin, and I needed to make arrangements to pick up the totaled car. Story 24. Guy told a coworker of mine that he was going to bring an AK-47 in and shoot the place up. She told me. I told HR. HR called the cops, and he was escorted from the premises, and a restraining order was put on him. Story 25. I read that as dumbest instead of worst and started typing this, so I'll finish it out anyway. I managed a call center for a while. One of my staff was a 23-year-old guy who just could not figure out how to get to work on time. He had his own car and only lived like 15 to 20 minutes away, but he would be perpetually up to a half-hour late shift after shift. We had a generous tardiness absence policy, 3 strikes for unexcused absences, but an unexcused tardy was only half a strike. And we were even nice enough to give him just a verbal warning at least 2 or 3 times instead of starting to count them, because the call center wasn't one that had like an inbound call service level. It was just outbound calls, so the time you lost hurt you in other metrics and eliminate your chance at getting bonuses. But soon enough, he had burned through 5 of the 6 unexcused tardiness he was allowed. The last time he was tardy, I brought him into my office and told him this was his final written warning. If he was even a minute late clocking in without a legitimate excuse for the next 90 days, he would be terminated on the spot. That was on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, he was scheduled to arrive at 4 p.m. for an evening shift. He walks in at 4:25 p.m. holding a Starbucks cup in his hand. I couldn't help it. The drive-through took forever. I took his badge and walked him out. I hope he learned from it. Answer. Almost the same thing happened at my job. This guy was a half hour late almost every day. Finally told him that if he was late one more time, he would be fired. The very next day he came in 10 minutes late with a coffee in his hand. He didn't think that 10 minutes was even late. This was a manufacturing job, and nobody could begin without the whole team present. Story 26. Oh, I have 2. One was a supervisor that got busted in a police sting operation involving meeting up with minors at a park via a Craigslist ad. The other was this guy that left work one night, chainsawed a hole in his pregnant ex-GF's apartment door, and started shooting. The baby and the baby's dad died. The ex-GF lived. Answer. Darn reminds me of this place some people I know lived near. Good sushi house, great food, great service, nice atmosphere. Then it's just closed. Like closed. Big extra lock on the door. No explanation, no sign. Nothing. Turns out that the staff had allowed a waitress who was underage to drink adult beverage. She drove home tipsy, hit some car, eliminate 2 kids. That was it. Restaurant, gone. Owner's entire family's income, gone. Jobs for employees, gone. Young woman probably went to prison. Story 27. Dumbest. Maybe not the worst. A mechanic in my chemical plant wrapped expensive copper tubing around his chest and put his coat over it. It was a really cold day, and it started drawing up to where he couldn't breathe, just as he got to the guard gate. The guards had a good laugh, unwinding the soon-to-be unemployed mechanic. Story 28. CEO walked into his office while he was self-care. She was not happy with how he was using his time. Story 29. Bank. One guy managed the dormant accounts. Incredibly nice guy. Everyone loved him. had been there for years. One day after an audit, it was discovered that he'd been embezzling money from the dormant accounts for quite some time. Turns out he'd gotten himself into debt he couldn't climb out of, and that was his solution. Not only did he get fired, he went to prison. Story 30. Ran a side hustle producing adult calendars. Discovered it because our sysadmins noticed he was using an anomalously large fraction of our network bandwidth. He was downloading a ton of adult content to harvest the images. Answer: that is very interesting. A long time ago, before everyone had computers at home, I used my work computer to retrieve the proof of coverage my car insurance company had sent me. The attachment had zero to do with insurance and was 18 pages of adult content. When I called them, the lady who took my call was genuinely mortified. She was very, very sorry. I asked if she wanted me to forward the attachment to her, and she said, "Please don't." They put me in a spot, since I could have potentially been held accountable for viewing adult content at work. Story 31. I don't remember the circumstances, but an employee slapped our general manager and walked out. No, the police weren't called, probably because the GM was doing a lot of shady shoot, and that's probably why he got slapped. Story 32. Got mildly injured by the garage door in the warehouse after fudge around. Agreed to go to the hospital after his supervisor very clearly told him there would be a substances test, and he didn't have to go to the hospital, and that he would be fired if he tested positive on the substances test. Remember, this was a mild injury, like a small scrape. Saying this as a coworker who saw it, not a boss trying to downplay. Guess who got fired? Story 33. I had a coworker get fired for applying for jobs on a job site using her company computer at work, after she'd been warned about appropriate internet use and that she was being monitored. Had a different coworker fired for looking at adult content at work on a work computer, also after being warned about appropriate internet use. I had an employee who was the absolute rudest and most incompetent jerk, but he made it easy by just calling in sick for 2 weeks straight and refusing to provide a doctor note. Story 34. Married plant manager had an affair with an assembly worker who was his granddaughter's age and a mom to 2 very young boys. The girl dated one of the techs who was 12 years older than her and worked at the same plant. The tech found out about the affair and eliminated her. The company fired the plant manager. Many forklift operators got fired for accidents while under influence. Employee hit a car in an employee parking lot and fled the scene and never showed up to work. So I guess they fired themselves, though it would make more sense for them to keep working to pay for the damages. Guy took bereavement leave for his grandpa funeral in UK, but instead went partying in Jamaica, and someone snitched on him, providing SM posts as proof. Analyst screenshotted MSG from their boss, and instead of forwarding it to his BF, sent it to his boss. His boss was named on his phone as C00CK sucking CUN.T. Some guy got caught reselling items bought at a sample sale. Prof got forced into early retirement for drinking on the job and being tipsy all the time. It took them forever to get rid of him, because he was tenured. Prof got fired for sleeping with his students. 3 guys, A, B, and C. A would come in the morning, clock out, C and clock himself in, and then leave 10 minutes later. Guy B came in the afternoon, clocked out Guy A, clocked himself in, and would leave 10 minutes later. Guy C would come in at night to clock himself in, clock B out, and leave 10 minutes later. They did that 7 days a week. Engineer claimed ton of overtime, but never came to work. She was discovered by an entry-level tech recently promoted from the floor who was sent to her for training on Monday. By Wednesday, he reported he couldn't find her Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. PPL who should have been fired but never were. Supervisor who slept with the assembly worker. The worker sued the company, claimed the supervisor used his position of power to get her to sleep with him, and won. After that, he slept with another assembly worker. The company got sued again for the same thing and had to pay. The guy is still there. A guy who kept coming to work hangover and one Monday threw up in a cooling liquid of a CNC machine that was shared between 4 job stations. The other 3 guys weren't happy. A guy who was working as an engineer without engineering degree, who balanced automotive assembly line in a way where it was impossible to build anything because he did such a poor job which caused months of delays. A guy who never did anything. He came to work, drank huge bottles of pop every day, and never completed his assigned work. Story 35. Woman owned the hibachi place next to the grocery store I worked in. She set her purse with the night's deposit down in the bagging area of the checkout and left. My employee, in full view of 5 cameras in that area that are very noticeable, saw the purse, looked inside, gave a big smile, picked it up, and left on the bus. Hibachi owner comes in 10 minutes later, freaking out. We run back the cameras, see what happened, give the info to the cops. Cops go to her house. She throws the door open for them to see the purse sitting on the TV stand and her husband packaging Coke at the kitchen table. Story 36. When I was a paralegal manager, I had to fire a guy for masturbating at his desk. We had high cubicles and he was in the back of the office. Well, we could hear the sounds. He was trying to do it under his coat, but it wasn't working. I had to fire him, and we had to get the 2 biggest guys from the office to carry him out as he screamed, passing threats at us. For 3 months, he waited outside our building every day and just stared at people as they left the building. Cops said they couldn't do anything about it unless he entered the building. Well, one of the employees complained to her boyfriend, and the boyfriend beat him up, and he never came back. Story 37. Call center job. Can't decide between the guy who lit fireworks off at his desk or the guy who challenged a customer who happened to be local to our location to a fist fight. Busy days for management, but all in all, probably the least remarkable call center firings that will be mentioned in this thread. Story 38. Not a manager, but I worked at a university in the department that handles all the aspects of internal construction, maintenance, and moving. One of our fellow drivers got caught self-care in a company truck. Worked at a restaurant where my co-worker was addicted to Klonopin and was found passed out in the bathroom. I worked at a supermarket chain and a new store was being opened up. They pulled employees from multiple stores to go assist in its grand opening and training of new employees. One of the managers and an employee, who was a friend prior to me working there, got caught logging hours for each other in the system when they weren't there, something to the tune of a full month's pay. Story 39. I will preface this by saying I'm not a manager and that this individual wasn't fired, but this is probably the craziest work story I have, so I'm rolling with it. I work for a very large Fortune 500 company in tech. 2 employees, a manager and our director at the time, were all expecting kids around the same time, so our office threw a baby shower for them. Probably 50 to 60 people attended, including our senior director. We were in this large conference room. The whole thing was impressively catered. They each got diaper cakes, and it was a pretty impressive event for a work baby shower. One of the adjacent teams we work with closely from another office also made a congratulatory video. Lot of effort put into this. Senior director then leaves the room, and one of the managers that reports to the director having a baby announces he has something for us all to watch. He airplays his phone to the big screen. The first thing to pop up is a video that has a woman with her tits out, wearing assless leather pants, bent over a backless wooden bar stool, being fudged from behind by a dude in leather. Room goes dead quiet for a solid 5-10 seconds, trying to confirm with their brain what their eyes were seeing. Meanwhile, this guy scrambles to get this intense adult content off the projector. The room finally erupts in laughter, and that pretty much ended the event. Not only was he not fired, but years later was promoted. Super talented guy, but I still can't believe he wasn't fired, didn't resign. Story 40. Guy Xerox copied multiple pics of his DK, put them in envelopes, and placed them under the windshield wipers of the female employees. Total creep. Story 41. Former assistant used his mom as a reference. Different last name. I should have caught it when she said she felt like she'd known him from birth. Had none of the skills he promised. Final straw when he ordered himself a 75 gaming mouse for the computer and a birthday cake-scented candle. After being fired, he left me a Yelp review telling people I was the meanest, craziest boss ever. Bless his heart. Story 42. I don't know if worse means dumb or bad, but either way, this is a question for me. They get worse as you go down. For context, because of where I work, all of these acts and crimes were committed by teenagers, usually 16 or under. Stole pizza, and when asked what she was doing, replied, "I'm stealing." Was on track for a minor leadership role when it was discovered that he had been stealing ice cream products all summer. The description of the thief was very specific, and this guy wore the same bright pink hoodie with a giant rose on it every day. Naturally, the hoodie was included in the description. The guy insisted that the girl who reported the thief had him confused with an identical employee who wore the same hoodie. sold other employees already used employee tickets to guests, and lied about it to the general manager. Stole the iPhone of a born and bred New Orleans guy, 3 times his size, off the desk of the HR manager. He then refused to give the phone back when the guy he stole from and his big brother knocked on his door, tracking him down with Find My iPhone. My almost assistant manager hooked up with a teenaged employee. The assistant manager was pretty young himself, probably 18. The girl was really into him and had been going for him. But when it didn't work out, she got upset. Her parents noticed and called us. We had to fire both employees. Threw a makeshift shrapnel bomb at another employee who put her arm up to block it. The bomb, a sealed metal water bottle with dry ice that had been inside for hours, exploded on contact with her arm, ripping it open and hitting another employee in the head. The bomb was accidentally created by another employee. Dry ice in metal water bottle. Stole a car under the truly mistaken impression that he was borrowing it and allowed to do so. He took another employee in said car to go get food, with himself driving, despite the fact that he had no license or permit. He thought a school ID would suffice. He then went about 60 down a 30, swerved from one ditch to the other, and totaled the car in the ditch outside the place of employment. Story 43. Our company regularly visits people's homes, as often as once a month. Many years ago, a dude has a key to enter a specific house to get their job done each month. Apparently, they keep sexy VHS tapes in the house, and he sits down to watch one in the living room. Unfortunately, he is surprised to find out that the 13-year-old daughter is homesick for the day when she came out and saw him doing his thing. I guess he technically wasn't fired since he just came to the office and dropped off his uniforms and keys and walked home without talking to anyone. Almost everyone in the small town the customer lived in canceled within a few months. Story 44. Company that had work issues laptops hired a guy to repair them when needed. Got a call from a local pawn shop that they just bought 10 laptops and found the company logo on them. He brought them over on his lunch hour. Story 45. When I ran a retail store, I once had an employee steal money from the safe. I got a call from one of my assistant managers close to close that the safe was short money. I drove to the store and verified the safe was short and figured out what happened within 10 minutes. The employee took a broom and moved where the security camera was pointing. To make sure it was no longer pointing at the safe, they stepped in front of the safe. Unfortunately for them, I could still see their legs on the camera, and they were wearing shorts. This happened in the winter in Michigan. Only one employee wore shorts to work at that time. Story 46. Not a manager, but have been in the restaurant biz for 30 years. Worst I saw was a 40 chef hitting on and basically attempting to molest our 16-year-old hostess. I caught him myself. He had her cornered in the dish room with nobody around. Even though he was a full chef and me just a sous, and 10 years my senior, I basically kind of fired him. Told him if he didn't leave now of his own free will and never come back, he would be leaving on a stretcher, possibly in a bag. Poor girl was in tears. It's been somewhere around 15 years, and it still infuriates me to think about. She pressed charges, it was all on camera, and he was arrested. Got off light though on a plea, which also infuriates me. Got a couple months in jail, not even prison, years of probation, and didn't even have to register on the intimacy offenders list, which also infuriates me until this day. He was never a chef anywhere around here ever again though. We blackballed the fudge out of him. Arrgh. Sorry, had to get that out. Edit. I'm not a hero, guys. I'm just what every adult should be. Zero tolerance to bullies and people that ignore consent. Answer. I think it can feel heroic in an industry that has historically normalized that kind of behavior. I was an 18-year-old waitress who got groped by a patron. He was tipsy at the end of a lunch shift. Wasn't the first time or the last time that kind of thing has happened to me, but it was the first time at work, and I was a bit shaken up. Chef heard me talking about it to another waitress and came out of the kitchen to deal with it. Chef Perp walked out the side entrance by the stinky garbage and grease cans. This was almost 20 years ago, and I still remember the chef's name and how he made me feel. I guarantee that hostess remembers you fondly as well. Story 47. Not at my current job, but at a previous job, a guy got caught trying to bring a heroic amount of cocaine on the airplane. And when TSA pulled him out of the line, he said, "It's not a liquid. What's the problem?" Story 48. He was perpetually late, uncommunicative, and constantly on his phone. Then he threw an exceedingly loud and public temper tantrum that I got promoted instead of him, despite his seniority. Story 49. I had a manager in her mid-50s showing customers male body part pics of her 27-year-old boyfriend. The customers were middle-aged senior women. It was so outrageous that I didn't believe it until several different parties confirmed it. Story 50. Had one of my very well-liked and hard workers leaving the state, had done everything needed to do with HR, 2-week notice, started returning issued items. On his last day, a store manager trainee got a bug up his jerk because this guy didn't have an issued item with him. Dude explained the above. Today is my last day, etc. Manager trainee didn't want to hear it at all. My guy gets the fudge, this shoot. I'm out, look. Jumped on a forklift and drove it across the parking lot to the Taco Bell drive-thru and bought a last meal. Parked in the middle of the parking lot and ate his burritos. Manager trainee lost his mind. My dude just smirked and tossed his company-owned stuff at his feet as he drove by, parked the forklift, and clocked out. Still makes me smile to this day. Story 51. In college, I worked at a tire shop. It was actually a really fun job. I never saw it happen, but one of my coworkers would take some tires as he was unloading the shipment truck, hide them behind the retaining wall outside, then come back at night and put them in his truck and take off. I'm still not even sure how he got caught, but they fired him for it, which is too bad because I actually really like that guy. Story 52. Not really a manager, but a small business owner. Wedding photographer. Showed up an hour and a half late smelling of whiskey and plant substance. Got him to photograph a bit past the ceremony, then told him to peace. Story 53. My dad-uncle's small family remodeling company, where I also work. New hire says, hell, let us use some tools for a job we're doing. Proudly says he stole them from his last employer. Later on, while driving the company truck, hops out and gets in a fight with a teenager right out front of the high school that I go to, and brags about kicking this guy's jerk. It was in the paper the next day as a mini riot. This guy was an adult just out of the army. Didn't last the week. Story 54. Worked with a guy who shoot his pants and just went home. Didn't say a word to anyone. Went home, shut off his phone, and called it a day. Showed up the following morning like nothing happened, and then got belligerent when his manager gave him a written warning for cutting out of work. He would have been well within his rights to call his manager and say he wasn't feeling well, and that would have been that. Instead, he ended up getting canned after balling up the written warning and throwing it in his manager's face. We did not fight over his chair. Story 55. We had an HR woman and a male executive at our company both get fired. They were accidentally walked in on in their executive's office. They were found to be both partaking in lines of cocaine, and the woman was busy playing the man's skin flute. Both were terminated. Story 56. Had a guy working for me who was a recovering alcoholic. One of the other employees went to Cuba and brought him back a Mickey of Cuban rum without knowing how bad it was. The guy drank it all in the bathroom before collapsing and nearly pulling down all of the fixtures. I made sure he got home and gave him an ultimatum: resign and use us as a reference, or get fired with cause. He chose the former. The guy lived under a bridge for a while after before settling in with his father in another province. I'm still his reference for employment. Story 57. I was a media director, and one of the guys on my team got tipsy as fudge off Hennessy that we kept in a VIP area for clients. We had to shoot a commercial that day, and the dude couldn't even hold his camera correctly. He stole Hennessy that is for clients only and couldn't help film the commercial. The next day I fired him. Story 58. Maybe not the worst, but drinking beer during a Zoom call while on camera. At 9 a.m., after asking for accommodations related to your problems with adult beverage. Story 59. Lots to choose from, but this was one of the first that I became aware of. Way back when the internet was being introduced as a business tool, and prior to any formal policies being established, there was a guy in a private office who discovered that the internet was full of adult content. Not only did he like viewing it, but he had a habit of printing it to his adjacent desktop printer. All is good until his printer broke, and tech services took it away for repair and redirected his print jobs to the central printer located next to reception. So the next day, while browsing adult content, he finds something he likes and hits the print button. But instead of the familiar whirring of the printer staring up, he realizes his mistake. He then attempts to casually walk up to reception to retrieve the printout, only to discover nothing in the tray. Instead, one of the secretaries is holding the printout, asking him if he is looking for something. He was fired the next day. Thing was, as there was no policy in place at the time of his indiscretion, if he fought the dismissal, chances are he would have won. Story 60. I used to be in the news industry on the commercial production side. A few years back, we ran a tragic story of a father and son drowning on a fishing trip. The father was a well-known doctor at a local hospital. The very next day, we had a salesperson literally approach the hospital he worked at and say, "Well, it looks like a good time to run a new recruitment ad." Our GM got a call from someone at the corporate level of the hospital, and we never saw that salesperson again. The GM didn't even bother to send an email or make an announcement about her no longer being employed. Managers were the only ones that were told why. Story 61. It was grease trap day at the salad joint. If you don't know, the dishwashing sink was set up to collect grease and oils so they don't go into the water system. Eventually, this trap needs to have its collection dumped. It absolutely is one of the most disguising and vile-smelling things you will ever experience. I had a new guy that had been there for around 2 weeks, and we needed to clean the grease trap and transport the viscous liquid to the grease disposal spot. That liquid went absolutely everywhere, running back into the kitchen, under tables, seeping into the baseboards and walls. I was absolutely astounded by the mess. This wasn't just something you could mop up. It was gallons of the most foul, slippery substance imaginable. The smell was something like dead raccoons and leech farts. Totally atrocious. I said, "Dude, we have to figure out how to clean this up." And he said, "Okay, I'll be right back." He didn't come back. I waited around 15 minutes, called him, and left a voicemail. "You're fired." I spent a few hours using various cooking sheets to scrape it up and dispose of it. I then mopped the remainder off the floor with whatever chemicals I could find. Pretty sure I took the finish off the floor. My shoes and pants were completely stinky and ruined, and I had to take the bus home, which took longer than an hour. The owner gave me 100 the next day. We decided to hire professionals from that point on. But funnily enough, the guy that came and collected it accidentally spilled the thing in his fudge car. That place was cursed. Story 62. One of the low-level marketing bros was making small talk to the office guest. She said she was going to golf this weekend, and he decided to tell her how much he disliked golfing with women and how much it looked like they were struggling to swing their clubs, and went on to say that he'd rather watch Special Olympic athletes tape hockey sticks to their hands and try to golf because at least that would be funny. He shortly found out that the office guest was none other than Michelle Wee doing a talk at our large team meeting. Story 63. VP of the company was visiting. Employee decided to drink and was completely hammered. VP noticed this. He denied it. VP asked him to get tested. He admitted being tipsy and offered to go home and come back the next day. VP promptly terminated him. Story 64. Asked them about their skill set and experience when they were transferred to me, as I was told they were underperforming. Asked specifically about things they said they could do on their resume and from their interview, not mentioning why I was asking. They plainly stated they had no experience in any of those things. Ended up letting them go within the week. My guess is they had someone write their resume for them and studied common interview questions, but no idea how they even got through the interview stage. Pretty sure the person who interviewed them got let go eventually too, though. Story 65. A supervisor took a company vehicle into town without permission. While there, he happened to see an employee he despised sitting at a coffee shop. Proceeded to challenge the guy to a fist fight outside, which eventually happened. All caught on camera. Fired him. Story 66. Had a guy show up tipsy to work. We all knew it, but he was a young kid, and we decided to give him a pass. The dude drives a delivery truck, told him to go home, sleep it off, and come back the next day. No punishment, just a day off. He insisted he wasn't tipsy and was good. Again, try to explain, no trouble, just go home and come back tomorrow. He wouldn't go. Gave him the choice, either go home or take a breathalyzer. If he didn't blow straight zeros, he would be fired. Opted for the breathalyzer because he knew he wasn't tipsy. Got a cop to come down and give him a breathalyzer. Blew a .05. Was fired okay the spot and got that day off anyway. Story 67. Hired a Romanian guy. After 4 weeks of him shadowing someone, he starts working on his own, and his work was dog shit. After a week, I take him into the office with another manager to have a chat and see if he understands what he's meant to be doing, if he needs more training, if he feels he need a couple more weeks of shadowing, etc. And throughout, he says no. I ask him if he's certain. He says yes, so I bring up the previous week's work and tell him he's not in trouble, not to worry as he's new, but it wasn't up to standard, so if he thinks he needs more training, just say so, and we can sort it out. He says no. Another week passes. Work isn't good enough, so I take him in again and go through the same process of asking if he needs any help understanding what he needed to do. Again, he insists not, so I said to him, If I don't see an improvement, I'll have to go down to the performance management process as his work isn't up to standard, despite him insisting that he knows what he's doing, and he starts kicking off, shouting and swearing, called me and the other manager a cunt. We both looked at each other like, WTF. We've given you plenty of opportunities to say you need more training, and he wouldn't calm down, so I said to him to go home, stay home, and hell receive a letter in the next couple of days to invite him to a disciplinary meeting because it's unacceptable. And he swung a punch at me. We took that as his resignation, and he never came back. Story 68 had a guy who was late one day, who then called and tried to get co-workers to bail him out of jail on the tipsy driving charges he got on the way to work that morning. Story 69. Manager of a store, mid-30s, stole around $1,000 of our store bank and used it to pay for his trip to meet up with his 14-year-old girlfriend multiple states away. Story 70. I worked at a food distribution center in the UK years ago. You could get into trouble for leaving the warehouse floor without authorization, and this guy wanted to use the loo, but didn't want to get into trouble. So he done a poo in one of the 1,100 LT or wheelie bins that are scattered around the warehouse. He was fired. I think I laughed for 2 days. Story 71. Worked at a hotel. One of the overnight front desk agents had to evict some guests for partying. After he had them removed, he realized that he had never finalized their check-in, and he didn't have any information for the people on the room. Very apologetic. Accidents happen, and good overnight help is hard to find. I wanted to get at least a picture of the people he evicted. I did some research on the key used to access the room, so I could check the camera on the time they checked in. Turns out the overnight front desk guy made the key for himself. He threw the party, and there was no guest kicked out. Story 72. I currently manage software engineers. If you've ever worked with engineers, they can be a different breed. I haven't necessarily had a bad experience with one, but have definitely met some characters. I hired a guy. He eliminated the interview. It was virtual. Resume was great, had excellent references. My team alternates between 32 and 23 in office days, and this guy had worked remote since 2011, and in his first day, it fudge showed. Before I even got into my office, I had 4 complaints about this guy's body odor. I wasn't really sure what to think until I got there and shook his hand. I darn near fainted. I've never smelled body odor like that in my entire life. I immediately asked him to come outside with me because I didn't want him stinking up the office. I asked him what was going on, if he had a medical condition I needed to be aware of. He had no idea what I was talking about, so I told him point blank. He smelled like a bomb hit a diaper. He was shocked and couldn't believe it. I asked him to take care of it and gave him the rest of the week to work from home to get it taken care of. A week goes by and he comes into the office. Immediate complaints from people. One colleague threatened to walk out. I asked the guy again what the deal was, and he told me, well, I sprayed Febreze on myself before I walked in. My jaw almost dropped. Apparently, this guy hasn't showered in literal years and just washes himself with water from his sink once a week. He also smokes cigarettes and apparently only eats 1 meal a day and drinks IPAs for dinner. I asked him again to take care of this, or there would be conversations with HR. Conversations with HR happened, as you probably guessed. He was eventually terminated, but one thing he told HR was that he wasn't sure how to properly shower and asked for guidance. Answer: when I worked in IT, we had one guy we openly called Stinky Smelly. I'm sure you can deduce why. This was a long time ago, when things like unacceptable nicknames, intimacy, harassment were still considered normal office behavior. He called himself Stinky Smelly also, and HR was never involved. He had a drinking problem and bipolar disorder. He was a good programmer and his contract was renewed, but when he struggled, it was actually sad. These are both sad. You always hope the best for them, but they don't seem to change. Story 73. I used to work for a large retailer that had all its employees take an annual anonymous job satisfaction survey on the computer. Although the survey was supposed to be tamper-proof, the store manager somehow was able to change the results before sending them to corporate headquarters. He would have been able to get away with it, except for the fact that he changed the results too much. As altered, the survey showed that every employee in the store was 100% satisfied with their job. Headquarters management immediately saw this was completely impossible, launched an investigation, and the store manager was soon an ex-manager. Story 74. My stupid sister lied her way up to get an engineering manager job at a boat manufacturer company. She has absolutely no education higher than a GED, HS diploma. However, boat company decides to give her a company credit card upon hiring and a bunch of projects for her and her team to work on. She has no idea how to do the projects because she is not an engineer, has no idea how to manage a team as she never managed people before. She doesn't show up to any project meetings, so the team she was hired to lead never knew what to do. Time goes on, and the employees that are left, hung up with no leadership on what to do, start complaining. The boat company finally tracks her down, and turns out she was traveling around the U.S. site, seeing and spending money at high-end restaurants. She was fired, rightfully so. Not sure if she had to pay anything back or was charged with anything. Sure hope she was, though. Story 75. No longer a manager, but I used to be a GM at a small shop in my college town. Immediately let a guy go that sent a text implying disgusting things with a hairbrush to one of our underage employees, who was very upset by it and no longer felt safe coming to work. My boss told me I needed to calm down and we shouldn't rush to let someone go because they're flirting, and told the dude he wasn't fired. Girl quit and business failed not even 2 weeks later. I was not sad to say goodbye to that place. Story 76. I manage a cheese department in a gourmet grocery store that also serves prepared foods. The employee in question was already a problem. An elderly lady came up looking for a fork for her lunch, and this guy said, "Sorry, I'm a cheesemonger, not a forkmonger," and turned away immediately. She was extremely upset, and we were out of disposable forks, so we ended up giving her a metal fork from the restaurant upstairs. Unreal behavior. We're known for good customer service. It was crazy to see an employee act like that right in front of me, and then joke about it after. Story 77. Had a barista at a college campus coffee shop we were having issues with. I was trying to reach him via phone. No answer, so the director went over to check on him. He gets over there. There's a few students standing around with a mix of horror and amusement on their faces. Guy is missing, but his phone is sitting on the counter blaring hardcore, gay adult content at max volume. Turns out, while no one was in the shop, he decided to view some adult material, shut himself in the storage room to rub one out, and in his haste, left his phone on the counter. Director calls me up and says, "You're never going to believe this. He was union, and they tried to fight to get his job back by claiming intimacy addiction and asking the company to pay for him to go to rehab. They declined." Story 78. I once had an employee complain about how they thought they were shorted a raise from a few months earlier, so I had the company look into it. They found out that it was a bit of a gray area for a few employees. They were hired right before the raise was issued, but the company decided to go ahead and give them all the raise immediately, as well as back pay them from the date the raise would have been issued. When I informed the employee of this via text message, they didn't show up for their scheduled shift and were going on vacation for 2 weeks after that day. They proceeded to blow up my phone with message after message of some pretty threatening stuff. Threatening lawsuits for wage thefts, lying to them, among other things. Person basically went absolutely nuts for the entire 2 weeks of their vacation. I never responded to a single message, just let them rant. I always have the schedules posted 3 weeks out, so when we called while I was out of the office, an employee told them when they worked next. Helpful employee had customers to deal with, so told them to wait a second. An angry employee got rude, so they hung up the phone on them. Angry employee called back, and helpful employee told them when they worked next, quickly. But dislike said they needed to write it down, so tell them again when they get a pencil and paper. Helpful employee showed great patience and did as they asked. Disgruntled employee then continued to text dislike things to me for the next week leading up to their return. Come said return date, and my boss and I were there waiting, just in case something got nasty. When they showed up, they just ranted about how they were stolen from and how they were going to sue us. It eventually led to them flipping me off in the office when I called them out about their wrongful accusations. They were suspended at that point and told not to return until notified. 2 days later, they were back in the store, demanding a bunch of disposable vapes they said they had there. They must have been thrown away months ago, because I could never find them. They thought I was lying, so they called the cops on me. Cops came and I explained the situation to them. They told the employee to leave, so they eventually left. This turned into them refusing to come back for a disciplinary write-up. They said they didn't want to get arrested, since we already called the cops on them once before. I reminded them that it was them that called the cops, but they said I was lying again. They instead tried to do the discussion on the phone, but they refused to listen to the write-up. At that point, we considered them a voluntary quit and washed our hands of them. Last I heard, they were threatening to sue the police as well. Kind of weird how they kept saying they had a lawyer telling them to do all this, and yet we never spoke to or saw said lawyer. Also, This was all at a convenience store, not some big-time high-laying job. Story 79. Dude, I was working for a tech company and we acquired another company. The first day the new employees arrive, we have a welcome meeting. In the meeting, we ask one of the ladies, older white woman, how she feels about joining her new team. This woman replies, "I'm happy to have new bosses. The old ones treated me like I was their N-word. The amount of jaws on the floor. Oh my God, she was immediately let go. LMFAO, wild as shoot." Story 80. We had a guy who non-consensually licked a coworker at a work event. Not the worst thing I've ever heard, but definitely the most amusing to recount that I've heard. Story 81. Probably the dumbest was a relatively low-level employee yelling at a colleague at their cubicle. It was over some data for a project. The person they were yelling at is one of the smartest, kindest, hardest working, easiest to work with people I've ever worked with, who I have repeatedly recommended for promotion to their manager. Guy was walked out that afternoon. It was a $90K a year job, and someone fairly fresh out of school right into the toilet and 20 people, some of whom he will likely encounter in his career, that will forever remember him for that. Story 82. One time an employee at my company, big company, did a reply all to a company-wide email complaining about the timing of employer-provided lunch. He was gone within a couple weeks. Answer: had a former coworker reply all to an email to her team from her boss, saying she would be seeking a different opportunity in the company. Her reply all to the team and the boss was that the boss was full of shoot. She was let go soon after. What makes me shake my head is that she was close to retirement age and only needed to work about 3 to 5 more years, which meant that whatever position she took would carry her to retirement age. I asked her old boss about it, and he said he really was trying to help her find a new position, as his team was downsizing, and he was trying to get ahead of it. She had had some friction with other members of her team, and he was genuinely trying to help her out. But saying he was full of shoot immediately made him realize that the company would be better off without her. Story 83. Senior exec tried to steal the company's IP and key employees to start their own business. Even got the CEO to sign a fraudulent letter to their potential investors. Got found out, terminated with extreme prejudice, and all hell broke loose. Fudge us up for at least 6 months. Story 84. Fired one of my sales reps for getting a adult worker in Vegas. Twice. His roommate's father was on the board of directors, and this made its way to me immediately. Asked his roommate to leave the room both times he was indulging. Dude was a clown and cheated on his wife all the time. I was happy to let him go. Story 85. After close one night, one of my employees robbed another employee at knife point in the parking lot. Came in the next day like nothing happened, and was surprised when we told him he needed to leave and that the police had been called. Story 86. Was a manager at a well-known restaurant as a university student. We hired and trained a 20-year-old girl with some prior experience serving. She often made mistakes like putting in the wrong items or forgetting to put her orders in. The last straw was when she accidentally gave a table an appetizer they didn't order. The table already ate half of the appetizer when she realized her mistake. What did she do? She grabbed the half-eaten appetizer from the table and gave it to the table that ordered it. They were next to each other. She said she was embarrassed to make another mistake. That's why she did that. Story 87. Jack off to adult content in a non-employee bathroom while on the clock, and no headphones, then falling asleep after he finished with the stall open and adult content still playing. Story 88. Security guard at a 24-hour convenience store. Intimacy harassed multiple female employees, myself included, over text. Video caught him going into the management-only office and using the staff phone number sheet to get their numbers. He also added the women on Snapchat after they popped up in his recently added contacts quick ad. Pretty easy to detect him as the account owner by both phone number and his full name as his Snap user. Reported him for following me around the store and sending inappropriate messages to me while working, with timestamps. His wife owned the security company he worked for. Fudge himself over big time. He thought I wouldn't report him because the other women he victimized had been too scared to do so. Story 89. Guy I worked with and helped to train for a management position was promoted to manage his own store. His very first quarterly audit saw the store $20,000 short. As an aside, minus 200 is enough to trigger the deep audit, so it was all hands on deck. He was put on admin leave pending a full store audit. I was yanked out of my store, along with 2 other A managers. Assistants got to play bosses for a week. The area manager And even the regional manager showed up, and we went through every last receipt, invoice, deposit, camera log, everything. Every scrap of paper that had anything even tangentially related on it was looked at. Cigarettes. He was short 20 grand in cigarettes. At the time, that was around 250 to 300 cartons worth of cigarettes, and he was being clever about it. At no point was he on camera carrying cartons out of the store. When deliveries happened, the totes carrying the cartons were always just off camera, but he made sure several other totes were always center frame, so it looked like they just happened to end up there. Best we could tell was he was putting them into half-full coffee cup boxes off camera. He then entered the boxes as transfers to other stores. Then he must have taken the cartons out of the boxes before dropping them off. We assumed this because he always ordered quite a few extra coffee cups each order, far more than he sold, and had been calling around to every store within 100 miles to pawn them off. He also figured out he could manipulate the invoices so the missing cartons wouldn't show up on the end-of-month report. Then he'd order extra cartons to show up on the next month's report. Basically, a mini Ponzi scheme. So we never actually had enough proof that it was he who had stole the cartons. We had a lot of, "it was probably him" evidence. However, he was not the only person who did ordering, entered invoices, check orders, and put away freight. The chain of custody was broken in many places. The assistant manager, also on admin leave, proclaimed to not know anything. The problem is the quarterly audits are on random days, so he had no way to know when to order enough cartons to make up for what was missing for the audit. I don't know if the company ever pressed charges. They never told us where it went after that, and I never saw anything in the papers. He was fired, though. Even if they couldn't prove he stole anything, he still came up 20K short on an audit, more than grounds to sack him. As I recall, the assistant manager was brought back on but forbidden from doing any ordering or invoicing or paperwork or just about anything an assistant is responsible for. Pretty sure she left after about a month. The store had to go through monthly audits for. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vancher. See you soon.